Here's a bit of information about the origin of tap dance. Tap dance began during slavery. In the 17th and 18th century, Africans came over to America with the tradition of their drum. It was really embedded in their culture. Over time, slave owners began to suspect that they were using their drum rhythms to create codes to communicate from plantation to plantation to plan revolts. And the slave owners responded by forbidding them to use drums. So the slaves then started to transfer their rhythms to their body percussion and footwork, slapping and hitting and shuffling of their feet. This style would become known as Juba. There's definitely a European influence in tap dance as well. English clogging and Irish jigging. In the South, in plantations, Irish indentured servants and African slaves were often living in close proximity to each other, so there was probably dancing happening and an exchange of styles and steps during that time. In the North, in New York City, there was an area in Lower Manhattan known as the Five Points District. And these were the slums of New York. Think of the movie Gangs of New York with Leonardo DiCaprio. The poorest people in New York City were living there, which was primarily Irish immigrants and African Americans. Okay, there was always a lot of chaos on the streets, a lot happening in the streets, including dancing and dance battles. Irish jiggers battling African percussive dance. So through this time, there was stealing of steps and cutting contests and a blend of styles happening. The first time that you would see tap dance on a stage, in a live performance, would be during the minstrel period, in minstrel shows in the mid to late 1800s. These consisted of white male performers putting cork on their face to blacken their face. So they were appearing in blackface, imitating African American culture, which was incredibly degrading and disgusting. But go figure, it was the most popular form of entertainment in America during the time. At first, it was just white males being performers, but then later African Americans males were allowed, but they also had to perform in blackface. Born a free man in Providence, Rhode Island, a gentleman by the name of William Henry Lane was known as the Master Juba. He grew up mostly in the Five Points district of New York, and he was known as the best dancer around. He received his fame by defeating many dancers in dance battles on the street. And his style of dance is known as a main contributor to the development of tap dance. What I read is that he really articulated his toes and his heels. So his heels were making the bass sound while the toes were making a higher treble sound. He was the first African American to perform in minstrel shows for a white audience, okay, and eventually he was able to perform without the blackface. He did also become the first African American to perform in Europe, and he ended up residing in London until he passed away at a very young age in his late 20s. But he's known as one of the main contributors to tap dance as we know it today. After minstrel shows phased out, vaudeville era occurred, and we are introduced to Bill Bojangles Robinson. So vaudeville shows were like variety shows, traveling variety shows, where there were separate acts that were all part of one big performance. Tap dancing was often included in the vaudeville circuit because tap dance was really popular at the time. There was an unwritten rule known as the two-colored rule in the vaudeville circuit, which basically meant if you were an African American performer, you had to dance with a partner. you couldn't be a soloist. They didn't want you becoming famous. Bill Robinson was the first to break that because his style was just so elegant. He was light on the balls of his feet, very, very charming, and he won over the hearts of the white audience as well as the black audience, and he went on to become a big star. Here are some highlights of his career. He was on Broadway, but he's most well known for his Hollywood films where he performed with the child star Shirley Temple. Although in those films with Shirley Temple, he was often playing stereotypical roles, such as her servant. Still, he did break barriers and pave the way for African-American performers. He's really responsible for popularizing tap dance. He was a big Hollywood star, the highest paid African-American performer at the time. He went on to teach Shirley Temple and Fred Astaire and Eleanor Powell, who were all big tap stars, how to tap dance. He was really, really well loved, and his funeral, which was arranged by his friend Ed Sullivan in 1949, attracted about 500,000 people. They stood on the streets to watch the funeral procession go down Broadway. His birthday was May 25th, and we celebrate National Tap Dance Day on his birthday. After Bill Robinson passed away, a group of primarily African-American male tap dancers formed a club called the Copacetics. And that term, Copacetics, is a phrase that Bill Robinson would use all the time, his most famous phrase, meaning everything's copacetic, everything's cool, everything's grand, everything's great. Okay, going along with his happy disposition. The goal of the club was to keep tap dance alive now that Bill Robinson had passed away. Some members were Honey Coles, Charlie Atkins, Peg Leg Bates, Sandman Sims, Leon Collins, and Steve Condos. They traveled and performed, and they had their famous repertoire, such as the BS Chorus and the Copacetic Soft Shoe, and of course the Shim Sham. These dances would be passed on from generation to generation, and these dancers really have inspired more modern day tap dancers. So that is a little bit about tap dance history. There will be more to come.